Chapter 1. The Thread That Runs So True. Gladys Jordan perched on the edge of her chair with her feet planted squarely under her, as if she were ready to bolt. Her gnarled fingers laced in and out of each other, paused to draw a strand of graying hair out of her eyes, then resumed their anxious movement. Her fact sheet said she was 53. She looked 65. In the chair beside her, her husband John crossed his arms and sat back with a skull. A stocky, powerful man, he was by no means fat, but he'd been eating well. 54 years of sun had crinkled up his eyes and tanned his skin. A contractor by trade, he enjoyed a spotless reputation for always coming in under bid and on time. "I'm here because Gladys wanted me to come," he announced. "I don't think a psychologist can help. It's too late." John Jordan didn't soften. We understood from years of experience the unspoken objections behind John's guarded attitude, so we admitted that to him. "You may well feel that being here today is wrong," we said. "Seeking help from a psychologist or a psychiatrist says that you're too weak to straighten things out yourself. Perhaps you have no common sense, because that's all psychology is. After all, healthy people control their attitude and emotions at all times. Are we close?" "That's right." "John, I understand you built your contracting firm from the scratch. Started right out of high school with a used pickup. How many trucks do you run now?" 7 pickups, 2 dumps, a couple vans, a front-end loader, and a blade. There was the edge of pride in John's voice. Justifiable, healthy pride. "I see. Too bad you're not stronger. If you were strong enough, you wouldn't need all those expensive tools. You could carry the loads yourself, level sites, with a shovel." John's face was a beauty to behold. His expression shifted from confusion to realization, the aha light bulb going on look to a sly twinkle. That twinkle was the first feeble sign that his hostility might be softening a bit, but the twinkle faded quickly. "I see your point. Counseling is a tool, but it still ends up the same. If I could just sit down and talk sense into myself, or if my faith were greater, we wouldn't be here." "That's not so. You don't move mountains with a word. You use a grater, not because your faith is lacking, but because it's the way it's done here on earth. We want to help you and your wife move a mountain." Gladys, 31 years of marriage, 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. I assume they're out on their own now. "What are they doing?" we asked. Her voice rasped, as tight and jittery as her body. "John Jr. got his BA in business and started a dry cleaning business. He says it takes a lot of time and work, but it's doing very well. Marcia is an ER nurse at St. Joseph's emergency room. She likes lots of action, you know. She deals well with pressure. And James is," she licked her lips, "he's had some problems, but he's in detox now and he'll do just fine. John, we understand your faith is very important to both of you. Divorce is not an option, right? You may have considered murder, but not divorce." The corners of the contractor's mouth turned up, more of a grimace than a smile. "You got that right." The non-smile melted away, and at last, a true softening crept into his voice. "Talk about incompatibility. Irreconcilable differences. That's us, constantly. Marriage is supposed to be made in heaven. Ours sure wasn't. If divorce were an option, if we had the choice, one of us would have walked out years ago." Gladys' features tightened. If we had the choice. She didn't have to use the word trapped. It was etched on her sad face. Her hands had not ceased moving since she sat down. "John doesn't listen. He doesn't even try to hear what I say. It's so frustrating trying to get through a brick wall." John countered, "She's not talking about communication. Communication is discussing good as well as bad. Everything she says is critical. In her eyes, I can't do anything right. Whatever I provide, she wants more or different. It's never the right thing, never good enough. There was no joy in the Jordans' marriage and their lives. The din of their constant friction had drowned out the quiet peace of happy life. Here, on chairs positioned 6 feet apart, sat the ultimate tragedy. Two good, sincere people wanting only to love each other, and they could not. Through the Jordans' lives, perhaps through yours as well, runs a common thread causing untold misery and unhappiness. It tugs and it pulls at their subconscious. It affects their judgment and robs them of choice, even as they falsely believe they are choosing intelligently and well. That strand has been labeled codependency. In its broadest sense, codependency can be defined as an addiction to people, behaviors, or things. Codependency is the fallacy of trying to control interior feelings by controlling people, things, and events on the outside. To the codependent, control, or the lack of it, is central to every aspect of life. The codependent may be addicted to another person. In this interpersonal codependency, the codependent has become so elaborately enmeshed in the other person that the sense of self-personal identity is severely restricted, crowded out by that other person's identity and problems. Additionally, codependents can be like a vacuum cleaner gone wild, drawing to themselves not just another person, but also chemicals, alcohol or drugs primarily, or things, money, food, sexuality, work. They struggle relentlessly to fill the great emotional vacuum within themselves. Our patients have described it as walking around feeling like the hole in the center of the donut. There's something missing inside of me. Codependency was first recognized several decades ago as counselors endeavored to help alcoholics and their families. In the vanguard of this movement was Alcoholics Anonymous. The founders of AA observed several things about alcoholics. They were deeply embittered toward God. They were rebellious and dependent, and at the same time, they were childishly dependent upon those around them. Although the first AA workers themselves knew God intimately, they felt that in some way they had to sidestep this bitterness toward God by using the phrase, God as I understand him, in their now famous 12 steps. Their intention was to focus on the need for outside help. The alcoholic addiction was fought inch by inch, day by day, through application of the steps and attendance at meetings with fellow alcoholics. AA was successful in rescuing alcoholics, but there was serious fallout. The families were coming apart within a year after the alcoholics dried out. Workers realized that just as the alcoholic was dependent upon his or her alcohol, the family very frequently had become just as dependent upon the alcoholism. They had adjusted not only their whole lives, but also their whole way of perceiving life to accommodate the alcoholic. They enabled that person to keep the habit up. They denied, they ignored, they circumvented. To the kids especially, this warped way of life was all that they knew. The alcoholic was dependent upon the alcohol. The family was codependent upon alcoholism along with the alcoholic. Thus was born the term. Al-Anon and Alateen were developed not to aid the alcoholic, but those close to him. The program was designed to restructure the codependent's way of seeing the world, of unwarping him or her, if you will, to facilitate adjustment to a brand new family dynamic. The concept of dependency and codependency is no longer limited to alcohol. It takes in the rest of the chemical spectrum: coke, pot, tobacco, heroin, and beyond. The beyond includes nearly any obsessive compulsion, a thing or behavior carried to excess. Eating disorders, for example, anorexia or bulimia, sex addiction, rageaholicism, workaholism, the compulsion to spend and spend, an extremely rigid and legalistic approach to living, and the compulsion to wash one's hands 55 times a day. These and other addictions have been placed in the same class as alcoholism. These disorders and others affect the family and close associates, the codependents, who may suffer as severely as the dependent or more so. The concept of codependency embraces the alcoholic also. The word codependent literally means dependent with. People sometimes think of the spouse of the alcoholic as being the only codependent. Not so. The alcoholic himself or herself is actively codependent. His or her dependency is with a thing, alcohol. The spouse is dependent upon a person, the alcoholic, and upon the nature of the relationship as the spouse helps and enables the alcoholic. The two are equally dependent upon each other, codependent. Another tragedy with which we will deal in later chapters is a problem of multi-generational nature. The serious dysfunction in a founding family will be absorbed by the children's families and their children's families, a ripple of misery extending further and further down through the years. The dependency or dysfunction may change. An alcoholic father may sire, for instance, a workaholic son who sires a compulsive daughter who spins her way to bankruptcy. But it's there. It's almost always there, wreaking its damage. At the clinic, we treat many codependents. People with obsessive compulsive behavior, their spouses and children of dysfunctional families. Statisticians estimate that at least 15 million Americans are alcoholic or drug dependent. We believe each alcoholic severely impacts at least 4 other significant people, such as spouses, children, and coworkers. Potentially 60 million codependents suffer from the addiction of those 15 million Americans. In addition, it is estimated that about 28 million Americans are the adult children of alcoholics and still suffer from the codependency they experienced in their childhoods. And that's just alcohol. These figures do not address codependency generated by addictions and compulsions other than chemical abuse. They are therefore extremely conservative. The actual number of codependents are much, much higher. Epidemic. There is no other way to describe it. When roughly 100 million Americans across 2 concurrent generations suffer problems of codependency, we are embattled by an epidemic of staggering degree. The unhappiness, despair, and wasted life lie beyond comprehension. Thousands of the patients at the Menoriff Clinic and Meyer New Life clinics throughout the country are codependents. And each of us counsel them, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist. The goal of counsel is twofold: to ease the immediate problems caused by codependency and to prevent damage in the future, both to the codependents and to the generations following. You stand a 1 in 4 chance of suffering from problems caused by codependency. What problems? Divorce and relationship difficulties, substance abuse, compulsive behaviors you can't seem to control, anger beyond reason, depression, and more. These are massive problems, reoccurring problems, problems that undermine your happiness and make life dismal. What about you? Is codependency at the root of your unhappiness? And more important, if so, can it somehow be expunged to ease the misery? There are 2 important reasons why you should examine your life and correct problems of codependency if they exist. 1 is to improve your own life, making it more manageable and controlled and avoiding serious mistakes. The other reason is the children, both yours and those around you. The impact of codependency, remember, is multi-generational. Problems in this generation warp the next and condemn those following unless the cycle is broken. One of the most moving comments we heard from a young woman in therapy: "I'm not sure if I'll ever achieve peace and happiness, but I've saved my children from this pain." The Jordans needed the guiding hand of a trained counselor to unravel their tangled marital knot. We showed them that we as impartial observers could see. In this book, we will walk you through the same process. In part 2, we will explore the causes of codependency, unmet emotional needs, lost childhood, and the compulsion to fix the dysfunctional family. You'll see how we brought each of the Jordans to term with the past. They analyzed it, raged about it, grieved over it, made peace with it. As you watch the Jordans deal with these issues, weigh your own situation against our own personal circumstances. In part 3, we'll look at the factors that lock codependents like the Jordans in a perpetual cycle of pain. The snowball effect of addiction, their denial, and their anger. Most of the thoughts and factors influencing the codependents' lives are either buried, ignored, or unrecognized. We'll uncover them. Next, in part 4, we'll help you look at how codependency influences your relationships and how you can halt destruction tapes playing in your mind. Finally, we'll take you stage by stage through the sometimes painful, sometimes exhilarating steps to recovery. Discoveries of driving forces you never realized you had will emerge as you inventory your past. Anger will boil, grief will work its healing. New choices and new directions will take you further than you ever dreamed. It won't be easy. Today, the Jordans do not float airily through an idyllic existence. Their healing is much more profound and practical. John is still a workaholic, but he's aware of it now and compensates. Gladys understands better her place in the marriage. Most important, they know the ways in which the past drove them, and they are learning to circumvent those driving forces that once ruled so cruelly. For the first time in their lives, John and Gladys are tasting real happiness. Much depends upon your desire to free yourself from the ghost of your own past. The children in your life will benefit, perhaps immeasurably. Your own happiness and ability to genuinely love hinge on the decisions you make now. Let's begin by looking at the 10 traits of codependent.